I am explaining you important topics for IP. Zoology Unit 1, Diversity of Living World. First topic is Phylogenetic System of Biological Classification. Phylogenetic system of biological classification means phylogenetic classification is based on the study of evolutionary relationship of the organisms. In this classification, along with several characters, evolutionary characters are also considered. This classification used for studying relationships. This classification is expressed in the form of phylogenetic trees. Phylogenetic cladistic system classification. Phylogenetic classification represents the historical evolutionary relationships of organisms, whereas cladistic classification deals with the recent ancestor and descendants relationship of organisms. Now, first point is it is an evolutionary classification based on how a common ancestry was shared. It is an evolutionary classification means the study of how living and extinct organisms are related to one another. Advances in phylogeny in turn led to phylogenetic systematics or evolutionary classification based on how a common ancestry. It is also referred to as common descent, means having descended from one ancestor. It results in new species forming one central ancestor population due to evolution. Was shared. Sharing a recent common ancestor means the two or more species are closely related. It is an which classification? Evolutionary classification. Which classification? Evolutionary classification based on how a which common ancestry was shared. Cladistic classification summarizes the genetic distance between all the species in the phylogenetic tree. Cladistic classification. It is an approach to biological classification in which organisms are categorized in groups, clades, based on hypothesis of most recent common ancestry. Is called cladistic classification. Summarizes the genetic distance. Genetic distance means it is the number of mutation or evolutionary events between species since their divergence. The simplest way to calculate it is to count the number of difference between two sequences. Is called genetic distance between all species in the phylogenetic tree. Here, phylogenetic tree means the pattern of branching in a phylogenetic tree reflects how species or other groups evolved from a series of common ancestors. In trees, two species are more related if they have a more recent common ancestor and less related if they have less recent common ancestor. Is known as phylogenetic tree. Cladistic classification summarizes. What it summarizes? Genetic distance between all the species. In which tree? In the phylogenetic tree. In cladistic classification, characters such as analogous characters, characters shared by a pair of organisms due to convergent evolution, and homologous characters, characters shared by a pair of organisms inherited from a common ancestor, are taken into consideration. In cladistic classification, characters such as analogous characters means shared resemblance between characters by other means than descent, such as adaptation. In this character shared, they shared by a pair of organisms. Characters shared by a pair of organisms due to which evolution? Convergent evolution. Here, convergent evolution refers to the evolution in different lineages of structures that are similar or analogous, but that cannot be attributed to the existence of a common ancestor. And homologous characters. Homologous characters means it is the fundamental basis of cladistics. In cladistic, we look for characters that we can hypothesize are shared because they were inherited from a common ancestor. Characters shared by a pair of organisms. In this shared by a pair of organisms. Inherited. Inherited means it is related to genetics, refers to a trait. From a common ancestor. Here, common ancestor means it interferences based on a cladistic hypothesis of relationships of tags taxa whose character states can be observed is called common ancestor are taken into consideration. In which classification? Cladistic classification. Characters such as which characters? Analogous characters. Characters shared by a pair of organisms due to which evolution, convergent evolution, and homologous characters. Which characters? Homologous characters shared by a pair of organisms inherited from a which ancestor? Common ancestor are taken into consideration. Examples for analogous characters: wings in sparrows and patagia in flying squirrels. Wings in sparrows means flapping helps a bird to push itself through the air. On the downstroke, the wing forces the air down, pushing the bird up in the process. And patagia. Patagia, it is a membranous structure that assists an animal in gliding or flight. The structure is found in living and extinct group of animals. Is known as patagia. In flying squirrels. Flying squirrels means either of two small nocturnal flying squirrel with folds of skin connecting the forelegs and the hind legs that enable it to make long gliding leaps also. Examples for analogous characters. Which characters? Analogous characters. Wings in sparrows and patagia in flying squirrels. Examples for homologous characters. Wings of sparrows and finches. Finches means a small bird with a short, strong beak. Ernst Haeckel introduced the method of representing phylogeny by trees or branching diagrams. Who is Ernst Haeckel? He is a German zoologist. Ernst Haeckel published the first trees of life in the history of biology in his book General Morphology of Organism. Introduced the method of representing phylogeny by trees or branching diagrams. Introduced the method of representing what? Phylogeny. Phylogeny means phylogeny attempts to trace the evolutionary history of all life on the planet. It based on the phylogenetic hypothesis that all living organisms share a common ancestry. Trees or branching diagrams means a phylogenetic tree is a branching diagram or a tree showing the evolutionary relationships among various biological species or other entities based upon similarities and differences in their physical or genetic characteristics. Ernst Haeckel introduced the method of what? Representing phylogeny by trees or branching diagrams. By this, we have finished phylogenetic system of biological classification. Guys, if you like my video, please subscribe to my Easy Learning channel.